Charlie Chaplin's visa was revoked, and he was banned from entering the United States of America. After many long days spent by Charlie Chaplin in meetings with journalists, he could hardly believe he was finally alone in his space to relax. At that time, my dear, he was aboard a ship that was supposed to take him from America to Britain. To disconnect from the world, he played some music on the radio, sat down, and tried to relax, but he kept thinking a lot about the last period of his life. Dear, the year 1952 was a pivotal year in the life of Charlie Chaplin. In that year, Chaplin, who was 63 years old, made a movie called Limelight. This film was about an old comedic actor who couldn't make people laugh anymore. This actor in the movie sank into drinking and depression after the lights around him went out. Interestingly, my dear, this story wasn't far from Chaplin himself. During this period, Chaplin was trying to create a new persona for himself, suitable for his age, experience, and views on life. He grew older. It wasn't time to do comedy anymore. Time for a change. But the audience, my dear, still wanted the old Charlie. Keep repeating yourself. This reminds me of the writer David Graeber. He always said that when you do something successful, the world makes sure you can't do anything successful again. Wrote a successful book. Now please make a movie out of it. Please create a TV show. Please write an article. Please make a play. Keep repeating yourself. This is exactly what happened to Charlie. He created a very successful character, and people told him to repeat it. Repeat, please. Who is this? Again, they wanted to see the kind man with a bowler hat and a cane. And the audience, my dear, rejected all of Charlie's attempts to renew his image on screen, some of which were actually shocking. For example, the movie before Limelight, he played the character Monsieur Verdot, and as the name suggests, my dear, it was not a nice character. He was going around marrying rich women, but my dear, after marrying them, he would kill them to inherit their wealth. Imagine, my dear, all this mischief coming out of Charlie Chaplin. Of course, this character was a huge shock to Chaplin's audience, to see their comedian as a killer. What was even more shocking to his fans was his real character, as some of its details began to come out publicly. Unlike the hero of the film Limelight, who faded into oblivion, Chaplin remained in the spotlight during this period, not for his artistic creativity, but because of many scandals that started to emerge and dragged him into court. And what was worse than these scandals were Charlie Chaplin's political views, which at that time did not sit well with the U.S. government. Chaplin wanted to distance himself from all this, so he decided that the premiere of Limelight would be in his motherland, England. Indeed, he took his wife Ona and their 8 children and boarded on Wednesday, September 17, the Queen Elizabeth ship heading from America to Britain. That's it. He didn't want any trouble, just as I told you, my dear. While on the ship, he was daydreaming and listening to music from the radio. Then this news hit him like a thunderbolt. Charlie Chaplin's visa was revoked, and he was banned from entering the United States of America. Dear, let me tell you there is a big difference between the Chaplin who left America in 1952 and the Chaplin who had entered it 40 years earlier. Chaplin, who had lived in London for most of his life until he was 20 years old, was finally fed up with it. Tired of the gloominess of the streets and the people, and tired of his situation during that period of his life, much better than before, but still an unprogressive system. Chaplin was working as a comedian in a troupe, the troupe of Fred Carnot, and the one who got him this job was his elder brother Sidney. So, Sidney was a comedian and was with him in the same troupe, and the first time Uncle Carnot saw Chaplin, he expected nothing from him. A young, frail, and shy boy, but when Uncle Chaplin put on the costume in front of actor Carnot, he was surprised by the transformation that occurred. What is this creativity and transformation? And he signed the contract immediately, and things went as planned. And finally, Chaplin became one of the main actors in Fred Carnot's troupe. Carnot's troupe was primarily based in London, but sometimes they did tours in other countries. Indeed, in 1913, they did a tour in America, and young Chaplin, who was 24 years old, went without knowing that he wouldn't see London again for many years to come. He boarded the ship, heading to America, watching the ocean in front of him, his eyes filled with enthusiasm and dreams. And America, my dear, at that time, and maybe even now, was the land of opportunities, the land of freedom, the land where people make themselves. But Charlie remained lost in his fantasies, and at one moment, overwhelmed by the grandeur, he stood on the deck of the ship and declared loudly, "America, I am coming to conquer you. Every man, woman, and child shall have my name on their lips." Meaning, my dear, wake up to me, O country that hasn't brought forth comedians other than me. Every man and woman, every child, the name Charlie will be on their lips. The one who narrated this incident was Charlie's colleague at the time in Carno's Truppe, Stan Laurel, the actor who would later become part of the famous duo Laurel and Hardy. Laurel looked at Charlie in astonishment and made fun of him. The truth, we don't know if this event really happened or if it was just a figment of Laurel's imagination. But what Charlie himself expressed in his memoirs was his intense enthusiasm for this trip. Charlie, my dear, in America learned the hard way, and one of the first things he learned was that English comedy was dry to Americans. The shows he used to perform in England, which made people laugh and scream, in America, when he performed them, the audience was throwing nothing at him but tomatoes. Anyway, my dear, over time, Charlie began to understand the American audience and to create comedy that suited them. One of the most successful characters he created, for example, was that of a drunken old man who staggered around and encountered various comedic situations. This character was very popular with the Americans, my dear, and Charlie portrayed it with great skill because the character grew up with Charlie watching it in front of his eyes. A character that had a reference for him, Charles Chaplin Sr. Who is he? His father. Charlie's father was a singer and theatrical performer, and failure and poverty surrounded him from all sides. And at the end of each night, he found nothing to alleviate his sorrows but the glass. Charlie and the glass got along very well, my dear, until the glass took his life. Charlie's father died at the age of 47 after he suffered severe liver cirrhosis. Just as his father's character could be a source of misery, it was a source of success for him in America. Charlie's stay in America lengthened. The months dragged on without bringing anything new. The work was a lot and very tiring. 4 shows a day, 7 days a week. It was very exhausting, to the point that Charlie started to get bored and depressed. One day, they in the troupe told him that someone had left him a message. Charlie opened the message and found someone named Kessel asking him to take the first train and go to New York. Charlie, who had no one in America, was very surprised when he saw this message. Then he remembered that he had a rich aunt who had immigrated to America. God played with you, Charlie, and you will inherit. He got very excited and felt that luck would start playing with him, and quickly packed his bags and headed to New York with a suitcase in which he would inherit. But his joy was not complete when he learned that the gold bag was not his aunt's lawyer who would inherit him. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a film producer who wanted to discover him. Still, we have to work and get tired. We were going to inherit. Charlie Chaplin entered the world of cinema through the Keystone Production Company. The film producer, Max Sennett, who was working there, saw Chaplin playing the drunk character. He said this is what was sought. And when the main actor in his studio decided that he was leaving, he immediately thought of Chaplin as a replacement for him. Sennett offered Chaplin $150 a week, which was more than any number Chaplin had taken before in his life. He thought at that time that if he worked there for just 1 year, he would amass a fortune and would not need to work again. But what Chaplin did not know was that the world of cinema would pull him in, and he would never get out of it again. Charlie Chaplin went to the studio the first day, and everything was very strange to him. He found it almost in the same place, 3 films being filmed together. And when he talked to the people there, he told them, "What are you guys doing here?" They told him, "Captain, sorry, we don't have a story here. We go to the location, improvise, and whatever comes out, we film and sell." This, my dear, was American theater, and we, as filmmakers, love to put a chase scene in every film because these scenes really resonate with the audience. A chase of two people running after each other. It doesn't matter who they are. The most important thing is to create situations that make us laugh out loud. But Uncle Charlie did not like this talk. The man was an actor coming from a theatrical background, and he saw that all laughter stems from the character in the story, and without these two, the matter becomes superficial and repetitive. But no one was willing to listen to him. Those working at the time in the industry were dealing with films as any factory owner deals with a commodity moving on a production line. The most important thing is to shoot a lot, sell a lot. The school of flip and flop. And when he objected, they told him, "Why are you being different?" There was a period when they were thinking of firing him because he was stubborn. But, my dear, in one day, all that changed. While Chaplin was walking in the studio, not finding anything to do, there was a director filming a scene that was happening in the hotel reception. The director felt that something was missing and saw Uncle Chaplin passing by and called him. "Come on, take it. Come on, you different one. Come on, put on some makeup and do anything." In that scene, Chaplin went to the actor's room, and he didn't know what he was going to do. Chaplin didn't know how to apply makeup. He decided to play with the clothes and said, "I will wear mismatched clothes, a very tight jacket with very loose pants, huge shoes, and a small bowler hat." And he found a cane, so he went and brought it from the track. Chaplin said that as soon as he wore this outfit, the character of the little tramp was born with its full features inside him. And this was not very strange because he had occupied himself for many years as a little tramp. Chaplin, my dear, did not hate London for no reason. The city was exceptionally harsh on him, harsher than usual, coming to life to find himself the son of a mother living alone with another brother, and she was fully responsible for them because their father had left a long time ago and left them. Let me tell you that Chaplin's mother, who was in love with the theater and had worked in it a long time ago as a dancer and loved to act as well, used to sit and observe the small details in everyone around her and imitate them in a very exhausting way. She is the one who instilled in Charlie a love for comedy, theater, and acting. But my dear, if comedy had been profitable, I would have been Elon Musk by now. Chaplin's mother found herself drowning in poverty. She lost her lightness and talent over the years and worked as a seamstress to be able to spend on her children. The money, my dear, that she was making was very little, so little that she, Charlie, and Sydney were living on the food distributed to the poor in churches and charitable organizations. And she couldn't always pay the rent every month. Charlie would find himself moving from one bad room to another, worse one, just because its rent was cheaper. Until a time came when she couldn't pay the rent of any place to live in, and then she had to take Charlie and Sydney and put them in a shelter. Charlie and his brother lived in the shelter for many periods of their lives. Life there, my dear, was difficult and harsh. But perhaps there was nothing harder for Chaplin than the moment when one of the teachers in the shelter told him that his mother had gone mad, and they had admitted her to a mental hospital. With all that was happening, Chaplin had to work many jobs just to be able to spend on himself. He worked as a newspaper vendor, a printing worker, and a glass blower. Sometimes he found himself dead in the street. But amid all this, he never forgot his dream of theater and acting, which remained the only motivation he had in life. And then, many years later, Chaplin was standing in the Axstone studio only to discover that his past had never left him. The first character that came to mind when he was asked to improvise was that of a tramp with an always empty pocket, living most of the time alone without a home, and struggling to find the price of food to satisfy his hunger. Freud, the famous psychologist who was alive when Chaplin's fame began to rise, wrote himself that Chaplin never acted but one character in his entire life, the character of Chaplin, the poor tramp, inspired by his personal past. As I told you, my dear, this Hollywood fabrication was not in Charlie's mind. And when he succeeded in convincing Mack Sennett of him as an actor performing the role of a beginning tramp, he gained an audience. An audience that went to the movies specifically to watch him, Senate agreed to Chaplin's request and allowed him to direct and write his own films. And also, after a while, he began to produce his films. And not just that, but sometimes he even composed the musical scores for his films. If you look at the three, you find everything is Charlie Chaplin. There is a typo in a child learning to write. My dear Chaplin was a perfectionist, as the book says exactly, and once he made an actress repeat her scene 342 times until he finally liked it. All this, my dear, was not overbearing from Chaplin that it was tyranny. It stemmed more from Chaplin immersing his soul into his art. He didn't deal with his films as a business he wanted to make money from, and that's it. No, it was his first love to which he went passionately and to which he resorted when he felt wronged. And in 1920, when his son Norman was born, he lived only 3 days. After that, the son passed away, and Chaplin found nothing to pour his sorrow into but to write a film. And indeed, he made his first feature-length film, The Kid, which hit the cinemas in 1921 and broke records. The film was about an orphaned child adopted by Chaplin, and they lived together on the streets, and they concocted any scam they could eat from, until the authorities discovered that the child was not Chaplin's son and tried to take him from him. The scene of the child being pulled from Chaplin is perhaps one of the most beautiful and saddest scenes Chaplin ever made. In subsequent interviews, Jackie Coogan, the actor who played the child, said that Chaplin was telling him exactly what movements to make in each scene, especially in this farewell scene. Every movement he was going to make, as he tells you, and this was most likely because Chaplin saw this scene in his past, when he was taken from his mother to go to the shelter in his childhood. We all know that cinema was Charlie's first love, but there were certainly relationships in the artistic community. Likes, comments, you know. The truth, my dear, is that Chaplin's relationship with women was a bit strange. He had a pattern that he repeated often. Chaplin would go to film the movie from here, fall in love with the actress acting with him. They both fall into sin. Then the actress would come and tell him to save her because she is pregnant. And here, Uncle Chaplin, of course, couldn't say the things that are said these days, which is, sorry, I was training you on the character, and you are the one who identified with it, by the way. But you know why, my dear. It wasn't possible to say that because these actresses were young. Their ages ranging from 15 to 16 years old. If he had denied what he had done, he would have been imprisoned, so he was forced to marry. The marriage would last a few years. Fail. Separate. Enter a new film to forget. Who does he love now, huh? The heroine of the film, and so on. Repeat. And the same thing happened with Mildred Harris, who was 16 years old, and Lita Gray, who was 15 years old, and both of their marriages didn't last 3 years. During these marriages, Chaplin was a superstar and beloved. He made films that broke records, like The Gold Rush and A Woman in Paris. But of course, news of his marriages to underage girls began to appear, and his image began to shake in people's eyes. And I wish the issue had only come up with scandals, but there were lawsuits filed against him by these girls to take settlement money from him after the divorce. Indeed, his not-so-good relationships brought him into the courts. He began to be placed under the scrutiny of the American government, and we can say that this began to write the first lines in Chaplin's tense relationship and the pressure file at the FBI. The relationship that would reach a dark point on September 17, the day Chaplin was exiled from America. While Chaplin's star was rising in America, the world began to change. In the other half of the globe, the Bolshevik Revolution, which adopted the communist ideology completely opposed to American capitalism, arose. It says here, my dear, America was holding its heart and afraid that the communist ideology would seep in under the doors and reach it, upsetting the world. And as Chaplin was working, taking one step forward and another back in cinema, he began to rise in positions until he reached in 1924 the presidency of the FBI. This man, my dear, was Edgar Hoover, Chaplin's sworn enemy. Hoover looked with a gaze full of suspicion and mistrust at Hollywood, anxious about its widespread influence. Everyone was now entering the cinemas, and watching movies, and thus the American citizen's consciousness was at the mercy of these people. And from that time on, he became the most famous person in Hollywood making films and getting married. Yes, bravo to you, my heart. He is Charlie Chaplin. Hoover, when he went to see a Chaplin film, did not see an ordinary film, and that's it. He saw criticism from underneath to capitalism, meaning he saw a poor hero being oppressed by the police and the rich and the capitalists. Not only that, but Chaplin also made people love him and sympathize with him. A poor homeless man like that, my dear, the American citizen's awareness is at stake. Indeed, he opened Charlie's file at the end, did not leave anything small or large out of it. I want to tell you, my dear, that the biographer of Charlie's autobiography, David Robinson, when he saw this file many years later, when he was working on his book, he found it 1,900 pages long. What is this? Not a file. This is an epic of Charlie Chaplin, bigger than the Kingdom of the Rings. Imagine, my dear, if Joseph Stalin himself, who, I mean, ruled the Soviet Union and cursed capitalism to its face with the father, the mother, the grandfather, the aunt, and the aunt's children. God, not 1,900 pages would be written about him by the FBI. In what? God, my dear, beware of the clown. Anyway, the 20s passed, and the 30s came with them, bringing the Great Depression to America. Chaplin traveled at that time and toured Europe, promoting his film City Light. The matter just expanded a bit from him. He continued to travel and tour the region. He found that about a year and a half had passed. During this period, Chaplin was exposed to many different ideas, including, of course, the socialist ideology opposed to capitalism. That's what he was talking about. Not out of nowhere. Those who fear a ghost, it appears to them. And Chaplin, who grew up in severe poverty, saw that socialism as a concept is a human and just concept, and that every person has the right to be guaranteed a minimum of equality and a decent life. Someone tell me, aren't you afraid of the FBI making a report about you since you're talking about this man? Dear, frankly terrified. I wish the CIA was the one writing about me so I could appear in what is the Miami series. Chaplin saw that it's not logical for someone to spend their whole life in difficult jobs and humiliating conditions just to be able to live. This, of course, regardless of the direction the communist regime took later. Chaplin, whose art was ultimately a mirror of his soul, expressed his ideas in a film called Modern Times in 1936. In this film, the little tramp was working as a factory worker, and from the stress and overwork, as well as the repetition, he had a nervous breakdown. The film then follows the attempts of its hero to adapt to the fast capitalist world and try to live among the mill that spares no one. This time, my dear, his criticism of capitalism was not from underneath, nor even allusions at Edgar Hoover. No, it was right there openly. Modern Times was the last film in which Charlie Chaplin wore the tramp's suit. In the film he made after that, The Great Dictator, he wore the costume of the German leader Adolf Hitler and also mocked him. You might say, where's the problem, my man? Hitler was America's enemy, and not from us and not related to us. I mean, what's the problem, my dear? That in the last 5 minutes of the film, Chaplin took off all the characters and addressed the audience on camera with a blatant political speech. And old Hoover, who sat analyzing, was like, he meant this by that, and he was doing this and that, suddenly found he was doing this in his face like that. He wanted to bring Chaplin from the back of his neck and yell at him, what are you doing? What man did you think you're a political leader? Gather yourself. Hoover's suspicion of Chaplin did not stop there and began to take it to much further levels. He suspected that Chaplin was a Soviet spy planted in the middle of America to spread communist ideas and mess with people's minds. He was dying to catch him under his hand. But you know what the problem is, my dear, that he didn't have a single piece of evidence to hold him on that he was a spy, I mean. But Hoover thought and told you. And who needs evidence? We're the FBI who actually said that I need to convict him. I have to bring him in from the political entrance. Hoover's diabolical thinking coincided with the entry of actress Joan Barry into Charlie Chaplin's life. Barry, who was 22 years old, was in a relationship with Chaplin, who was 52 years old. Anyway, during this period, Barry gave birth to a daughter and claimed that she was Chaplin's daughter, and filed a paternity lawsuit against him. Hoover exploited this case to stir up public opinion against Chaplin and let the press paint him as a foreign monster coming to pollute the minds of innocent American youth and sexually exploit young girls. Indeed, the public image of Chaplin at that time was one of the worst, although blood tests proved that Joan's daughter was not Chaplin's, and all of America did not care about that. Uncle Chaplin was silent, let people put paprika and oil on him, and put him in the oven for 14 hours, and he wakes up as brisket. Never. He made the character Monsieur Verdot. We talked about it at the beginning. For the first time in Chaplin's history, his film was banned in many American cinemas and failed critically and publicly. During this period, Chaplin, who was used to throwing his worries into work, began working on Limelight. He spent 4 whole years writing it. And when the film was finally filmed, Chaplin traveled to England to promote it, and Hoover played his last move, and Chaplin found himself, while at sea, banned from entering America. Oh, Charlie Chaplin, one of the greatest comedic actors in American history, was banned from entering it. Oh, black day, guys. After Chaplin heard the news, my dear, he decided to continue his travel program without change. But the question was here, what was he going to do, and where was he going to live? He thought, of course, to live in Britain, his motherland, but he discovered that the FBI in America had coordinated with Mi-5 and made them monitor him and tap his calls. Of course, a situation like this worried Chaplin, so he took his wife and children and went to Switzerland. He bought a house overlooking Lake Geneva, lived there a quiet life, a period during which he tried to distance himself from his past and forget it. But sorrow never left him all the time. He thought that now he had become forgotten and alone, exiled and far from everything he had achieved. Ona, his last wife, who stayed with him until the end of his days when she found him like that, suggested to him at that time that he return to the only thing that gave him life and brought back his feeling of life. She suggested that he return to work, to cinema, and Chaplin agreed immediately. And in 1957, he made a film A King in New York, in which he starred, directed, produced, and also wrote when he was 68 years old. Charlie Chaplin, my dear, apparently did not learn from his mistakes. And in this film, he made explicit criticism and mockery right there from the policies of America, which had no patience at that time. The film, as expected, my dear, was banned from America, the land of freedoms, and the film remained banned until 1972. Chaplin, during this period, realized the importance of work for him, so he continued working on many artistic projects throughout the remaining years. He himself said in one of the interviews that whenever I say I will stop, I find my head exploding with ideas. Anyway, my dear, Chaplin worked on one of his most important projects during this period. This project was not a cinematic project, but a human project. Chaplin wrote a book, my autobiography. A large book of more than 500 pages. But my dear, this book was like the vessel that the 70-year-old Chaplin traveled with to his miserable childhood in the streets of London, its theaters and its shelters, and he tells us the story of his rise from them to the worlds of glory and fame. The book, my dear, amazed everyone, readers and critics alike, and some doubted that Chaplin had fabricated the story of his childhood so that people would sympathize with him. But every time someone investigated it, they discovered that his story was 100% correct. Chaplin's life remained the same in Geneva, between working on films, meeting friends, and spending time with his family. His enthusiasm for work remained the same, but my dear, his health continued to decline. And one day in 1972, after about 20 years of Charlie Chaplin's exile, he opened one of the letters sent to him and found a letter from the Oscars asking him to come to America to receive an honorary Oscar and honor him. Chaplin, my dear, couldn't believe his eyes. the country that had expelled him 20 years ago today, its most important award would be presented to him as a recognition of his art. You might have been excited, but Charlie Chaplin was worried about returning to America. What were they going to do to him there? Could this be a plan to catch him and imprison him? Or maybe it was not a small fear that he would go there and discover that no one remembered him. The world had forgotten him. This, my dear, is the nightmare of any comedian, to be forgotten. But my dear, the surprise was that what happened was completely different. Chaplin went to America, an 80-year-old man in a country whose features had completely changed, feeling like a stranger. He passed his old studios in the car, imagining that they had been sold or turned into warehouses. But he was surprised that they were still the same, exactly as he had left them. Not only that, but they had become museums. And at the Oscar ceremony, when he went on stage to receive the award in front of the best actors, directors, and writers in the world, all these people, my dear, stood and clapped for him for 12 full minutes, and this was the longest clapping time in Oscar history. Overwhelmed by emotion, my dear, Charlie's tears flowed. This was the perfect moment that this tramp had been waiting for 20 years, and the nightmare of the forgotten comedian turned into a very beautiful dream. But unfortunately, my dear, this last dream was in a way Charlie Chaplin's last honor. It was considered an early obituary for him. As I told you, his health was declining, and he couldn't live much longer. And on December 25, Charlie Chaplin died in his sleep. And the curtain fell for the last time on the little tramp who had mocked on screen all his sufferings and tragedies and turned the tears of his past into much laughter for all his audiences, and who had transformed the film industry from 3 films in the same location without a story or characters into a refined art in which we care about every movement and the smallest detail to produce an artistic work. And we can say with confidence that cinema before Chaplin is not the cinema after him. But my dear, finally we thank you for this follow-up, and we thank you for your comments and suggestions. But my dear, see you soon, God willing. Don't forget to watch the previous episodes. And if we are on YouTube, subscribe to the channel.